speak in English if you like. Takip edenler varsa hocamız çok ilginç şeyler yaptı geçmişinde. Hala da ilginç şeyler yapmaya devam ediyor. Provokatif bir seminer bekliyorum ben. Bakalım.
Evet. Evet, bu güzel seminer olanağını hazırladığı için başta rektörümüz olmak üzere Özyeğin Üniversitesi'ne çok teşekkürlerimizi sunuyoruz. Alan Sokal'ı belki duymuşsunuzdur. Kendisi Türkçe'de Son Moda Saçmalar ve Postmodern Aydınların Bilimi Kötüye Kullanışı kitabıyla ünlenmişti. 2000'lerin başında çıktı kitap ama tükendi. Uzun süredir baskısı yapılmıyor. Şimdi Alfa Yayınları'ndan tekrar baskısını yapacağız. Alan Sokal, New York Üniversitesi'nde fizik profesörü ve University College London'da matematik profesörü. Kendi uzmanlık alanı matematiksel fizik, phase transition, theory of phase transition. 1996 yılında yaptığı şakayla ünlü Sokal. Amerika'da çıkan ünlü bir postmodern dergiye, Social Text dergisine bir makale gönderir. Bu fiziği bilerek yanlış kullandığı bir makaledir. Günün modasına uygun olarak. Ve ondan sonra da bu makale editörler tarafından pek fazla okunmadan basılır. Ve ondan sonra da bunun bir şaka olduğunu, aslında ben burada postmodern dergilerde her türlü saçma sapan makalelerin basılacağını ispat etmek için bu yazıyı gönderdim der ve ondan sonra işte büyük olay çıkar. Uzun yıllar süren bir Sokal Vakası yaşanır. İşte bir tarafta bilim adamları, Steven Weinberg gibi Nobel ödüllü fizikçiler Sokal'ın yanında, karşı tarafta işte Derrida, Bruno Latour falan gibi Fransız aydınları bir tarafta, uzun yıllar süren bir tartışma olur. Şimdi Alan Sokal'ın son kitabı Beyond Hoax, Türkçe'ye yeni çevrildi. Bu kitap vesilesiyle zaten davet ettik kendisini. Şakanın Ardından ismiyle çevrildi, Beyond Hoax. Bu yeni kitabında 3 bölüm var. Birinci bölümde bu yaptığı şakanın devamındaki tartışmaları anlatıyor. Ama ikinci ve üçüncü bölümleri daha farklı ki bugünkü konuşmasında da o bölümlere yoğunlaşacak Sokal. İkinci bölümde bilim felsefesi var kitapta. Bu postmodern aydınların temel tezlerinin aslında Kuhn, Popper'a kadar gittiğini ve daha çok tabii en son Feyerabend'a kadar gittiğini savunuyor Alan Sokal. Sonra üçüncü bölümde de bu tip tartışmaların aslında akademik bir tartışma olmadığını, bütün toplumu ilgilendirdiğini ve bunun toplumsal sonuçları olduğunu söylüyor. Ve kitabında onları tartışıyor. Toplumsal sonuçları pseudoscience, yani sözde bilim, din ve işte bu tip tartışmaların topluma yayıldığı zaman hangi sonuçları doğuracağı üstüne politik bir bölüm var. Bugünkü konuşması da biraz politik olacak. Daha çok yani bilim neden önemli ve bilimsel dünya görüşünün nasıl bir etik ve politik sonuçları olabileceğine dair bir konuşma yapacak. Ama ben sizi fazla tabii yönlendirmeyeyim. Sözü Sokal'a bırakalım. Çok teşekkürler. Yes, I would like to invite Professor Alan Sokal for his speech.
Does this work? Yes. Okay. Oh. Computer.
Okay, so I'd like to thank Özyeğin University for inviting me to give this talk about the nature of scientific inquiry and its importance for public life. At a superficial level, you might say that my topic is the relation between science and society. But as I hope will become clear, my aim is to discuss the importance not so much of science, but of what one might call the scientific worldview, a concept that goes far beyond the specific disciplines that we usually think of as science, in humanity's collective decision-making. I want to argue that clear thinking, combined with a respect for evidence, especially inconvenient and unwanted evidence, evidence that challenges our preconceptions, are of the utmost importance to the survival of the human race in the 21st century. Now, of course, you might think that calling for clear thinking and a respect for evidence is a bit like advocating motherhood and apple pie, if you'll pardon me this American expression. And in a sense, you'd be right. Hardly anyone will openly defend muddled thinking or disrespect for evidence. Rather, what people do is to surround these practices with a fog of verbiage designed to conceal from their listeners, and in most cases, I would imagine from themselves as well, the true implications of their way of thinking. George Orwell got it right when he observed that the main advantage of speaking and writing clearly is that, quote, when you make a stupid remark, its stupidity will be obvious, including to yourself. So I hope that I will be as clear today as Orwell would have wished. And I intend to illustrate disrespect for evidence with a variety of examples coming from the left and the right and the center, starting from some fairly lightweight targets and proceeding to heavier ones. I aim to show that the implications of taking seriously an evidence-based worldview are rather more radical than many people realize. So let me start, perhaps a bit pedantically, by drawing some important distinctions. First of all, the word science, as commonly used, has at least 4 distinct meanings. It denotes an intellectual endeavor aimed at a rational understanding of the natural and social world. It denotes a corpus of currently accepted substantive knowledge. It denotes the community of scientists with its mores and with its social and economic structure. And finally, it denotes applied science and technology. In this talk, I will be concentrating on the first 2 aspects, along with some secondary references to the sociology of the scientific community, and I will not address technology at all. So by science, I mean, first of all, a worldview that gives primacy to reason and observation, and a methodology aimed at acquiring accurate knowledge of the natural and social world. This methodology is characterized, above all else, by the critical spirit, namely, the commitment to the incessant testing of assertions through experiments and/or observations and/or experiments. The more stringent the tests, the better, and to revising or discarding those theories that failed the test. One corollary of the critical spirit is fallibilism, namely, the understanding that all our empirical knowledge is tentative, incomplete, and open to revision in the light of new evidence or cogent new arguments. Though, of course, the most well-established aspects of scientific knowledge are unlikely to be discarded entirely. Now, it's important to note that well-tested theories in the mature sciences are supported in general by a powerful web of interlocking evidence coming from a variety of sources. So, for instance, moreover, the progress of science tends to link these theories into a unified framework, so that, for instance, biology has to be compatible with chemistry, and chemistry with physics. The philosopher Susan Hack has illuminatingly analogized science to the problem of completing a crossword puzzle, in which any modification of one word will entail changes in interlocking words. In most cases, the required changes will be fairly local, but in some cases it may be necessary to rework large parts of the puzzle. Now, I stress that my use of the term science is not limited to the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, and so on, but includes investigations aimed at acquiring accurate knowledge of factual matters relating to any aspect of the world by using rational empirical methods analogous to those employed in the natural sciences. And please note the limitation to questions of fact. I'm intentionally excluding from my purview questions of ethics, aesthetics, ultimate purpose, and so forth. So science, as I use the term, and of course everyone has the right to use the term as they wish, but science, as I am using the term in this talk, is routinely practiced not only by physicists, chemists, and biologists, but also by historians, detectives, plumbers, and indeed all human beings in at least some aspects of our daily lives. Now, of course, the fact that we all practice science from time to time does not mean that we all practice it equally well, or that we practice it equally well in all areas of our lives. Now, the extraordinary successes of the natural sciences over the last 400 years in learning about the world, from quarks to quasars and everything in between, are well known to every modern citizen. Science is a fallible, yet enormously successful method for obtaining objective, albeit approximate and incomplete, knowledge of the natural world, and to a lesser extent also the social world. But surprisingly, not everyone accepts this. And here I come to my first and most lightweight example of adversaries of the scientific worldview, namely academic postmodernists and extreme social constructivists. Such people insist that so-called scientific knowledge does not, in fact, constitute objective knowledge of a reality external to ourselves, but is a mere social construction, on a par with myths and religions, which therefore have an equal claim to validity. Now, if such a view seems so implausible that you wonder whether I'm somehow exaggerating, consider the following assertions by prominent sociologists. The validity of theoretical propositions in the sciences is in no way affected by factual evidence. That's Kenneth Gergen. The natural world has a small or non-existent role in the construction of scientific knowledge. That's sociologist of science Harry Collins. For the relativist, such as ourselves, there is no sense attached to the idea that some standards or beliefs are really rational, as distinct from merely locally accepted as rational. That's Barry Barnes and David Bloor. Now, many more similar quotes could be given, but let me not spend time beating a dead horse, as the arguments against postmodernist relativism are by now fairly well known. Suffice it to say that postmodernist writings systematically confuse truth with claims of truth, fact with assertions of fact, and knowledge with pretensions to knowledge, and then sometimes go so far as to deny that these distinctions have any meaning. Now, it's worth noting that the postmodernist writings I have just quoted all come from the 1980s and early 1990s. In fact, over the past decade, academic postmodernists and social constructivists seem to have backed off the most extreme views that they previously espoused. Perhaps I and like-minded critics of postmodernism can take some small credit for this by initiating a public debate that shed a harsh light of criticism on these views and forced some strategic retreats. But most of the credit, I think, has to be awarded to George W. Bush and his friends, who have shown just where science bashing can lead in the real world. Nowadays, even sociologist of science Bruno Latour, who spent several decades stressing the so-called social construction of scientific facts, now laments the ammunition that he fears he and his colleagues have given to the Republican right wing, helping them to deny or obscure the scientific consensus on global climate change, biological evolution, and a host of other issues. That is exactly the danger I was trying to warn about back in 1996. I hate to say I told you so, but I did. As did, several years before me, many other defenders of science and rationality. Let me now pass to a second set of adversaries of the scientific worldview, namely the advocates of pseudoscience. Now, this is, of course, an enormous area, so let me focus just on one socially important aspect of it, namely so-called complementary and alternative therapies in health and medicine. And within this, I'd like to look in a bit of detail at one of the most widely used alternative therapies, namely homeopathy, which is an interesting case because its advocates sometimes claim that there is evidence from meta-analyses of clinical trials that homeopathy works. Now, one basic principle in all of science is GIGO. In English, that's garbage in, garbage out. So this principle is particularly important in statistical meta-analysis because if you have a bunch of methodologically poor studies, each with small sample size, and then you subject them to meta-analysis, what can happen is that the systematic biases in each study, if they mostly point in the same direction, can reach statistical significance when the studies are pooled. And this possibility is particularly relevant here because meta-analyses of homeopathy invariably find an inverse correlation between the methodological quality of the study and the observed effectiveness of homeopathy. That is to say, the sloppiest studies find the strongest evidence in favor of homeopathy. When one restricts attention only to methodologically sound studies, those that include adequate randomization and double blinding, predefined outcome measures, and clear accounting for dropouts, the meta-analyses find no statistically significant effect, whether positive or negative, of homeopathy compared to placebo. But the lack of convincing statistical evidence for the efficacy of homeopathy is not, in fact, the main reason why I and other scientists are skeptical, to put it mildly, about homeopathy. And it's worth taking a few moments to explain this main reason because it provides some important insights into the nature of science. Most people, perhaps even most users of homeopathic remedies, do not clearly understand what homeopathy is. They probably think of it as a species of herbal medicine. Now, of course, plants contain a wide variety of substances, some of which can be biologically active, with either beneficial or harmful consequences, as Socrates learned. But homeopathic remedies, by contrast, are pure water and starch. The alleged active ingredient is so highly diluted that in most cases not a single molecule remains in the final product. And so the fundamental reason for rejecting homeopathy is that there is no plausible mechanism by which homeopathy could possibly work unless one rejects everything that we have learned over the last 200 years about physics and chemistry, namely that matter is made of atoms and that the properties of matter, including its chemical and biological effects, depend on its atomic structure. There is simply no way that an absent ingredient could have a therapeutic effect. High-quality clinical trials find no difference between homeopathy and placebo because homeopathic remedies are placebos. Now, advocates of homeopathy sometimes respond to this argument by asserting that the curative effect of homeopathic remedies arises from a memory of the vanished active ingredient that is somehow retained by the water in which it was dissolved, and then you have to remember by the starch when the water is evaporated. But the difficulty, once again, is not simply the lack of any reliable experimental evidence for such a memory of water. Rather, the problem is that the existence of such a phenomenon would contradict well-tested science, in this case, the statistical mechanics of fluids. The molecules of any liquid are constantly being bumped by other molecules, what physicists call thermal fluctuations, so that they quickly lose any memory of their past configuration. And here, when I say quickly, I'm talking picoseconds, not months. In short, all the millions of experiments confirming modern physics and chemistry also constitute powerful evidence against homeopathy. For this reason, the flaw in the justification of homeopathy is not merely the lack of statistical evidence showing the efficacy of homeopathic remedies over placebo at the 95% or 99% confidence level. Even a clinical trial at the 99.9% confidence level would not begin to compete with all the evidence in favor of modern physics and chemistry. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And in the unlikely event that such convincing evidence is ever forthcoming, the person who provides it will assuredly win a triple Nobel Prize in physics, chemistry, and biology, beating out Marie Curie, who won only 2. Despite the utter scientific implausibility of homeopathy, homeopathic products can be marketed in the United States without having to meet the safety and efficacy requirements that are demanded of all other drugs, because they got a special dispensation in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. Indeed, US government regulations require each homeopathic remedy to state on the label at least one medical condition that the product is intended to treat, but without requiring any evidence that the product is actually efficacious in treating that condition. The laws in other Western countries are equally scandalous, if not more so. Fortunately, it appears that this particular pseudoscience has not yet made significant inroads in Turkey, certainly not compared to its wide penetration in France and Germany, where homeopathic products are packaged like real medicines and sold side by side with them in virtually every pharmacy. But other and more dangerous pseudosciences have made large inroads in Turkey, as they have in the United States. I'm referring, as you may have guessed, to the denial of biological evolution. It's essential to begin our analysis by distinguishing clearly between 3 very different issues, namely, the fact of the evolution of biological species, the general mechanisms of that evolution, and the precise details of those mechanisms. Of course, one of the favorite tactics of the deniers of evolution is to confuse these 3 aspects. Among biologists, and indeed among the general educated public, the fact that biological species have evolved is established beyond any reasonable doubt. Most species that existed at various times in the past no longer exist. And conversely, most species that exist today did not exist for most of the Earth's past. In particular, modern Homo sapiens did not exist 1 million years ago. And conversely, other species of hominids, such as Homo erectus, existed then and are now extinct. The fossil record is unequivocal on this point, and this has been well understood since at least the late 19th century. A more subtle issue concerns the mechanisms of biological evolution. And here, our modern scientific understanding took a longer time to develop. Though the basic idea, namely descent with modification combined with natural selection, was already set forth with eminent clarity by Darwin in his 1859 book, the precise mechanisms underlying Darwinian evolution did not become fully elucidated until the development of genetics and molecular biology in the first half of the 20th century. Nowadays, we have a good understanding of the overall process. Errors in copying DNA during reproduction cause mutations. Some of these mutations either increase or decrease the organism's success at survival and reproduction. natural selection acts to increase the frequency in the gene pool of those mutations that increase the organism's reproductive success. As a result, over time, species develop adaptations to ecological niches, old species die out, and new species arise. This general picture is nowadays established beyond any reasonable doubt, not only by paleontology, but also by laboratory experiments. Of course, when it comes to the precise details of evolutionary theory, there's still lively debate among specialists, just as there is in any active scientific field. For instance, concerning the quantitative importance of group selection or of genetic drift. But these debates in no way cast doubt on either the fact of evolution or on its general mechanisms. Indeed, as the celebrated geneticist Theodosius Dobzhansky pointed out in a 1973 essay, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Now, everything that I have just said is, of course, common knowledge to anyone who has taken a half-decent course in high school biology. The trouble is, fewer and fewer people, at least in the United States, and I fear also in Turkey, nowadays have the good fortune to be exposed to a half-decent course in high school biology. And the cause of that scientific illiteracy is, need I say it, politics. More precisely, politics combined with religion. Some people reject evolution because they find it incompatible with their religious beliefs. And in countries where such people are numerous or politically powerful or both, politicians kowtow to them and suppress the teaching of evolution in the public schools, with the result that the younger generation is denied the opportunity to evaluate the scientific evidence for themselves, and the scientific ignorance of the populace is faithfully reproduced in future generations. Now let me show, here there is a slide I want to show. Oops. How do I skip pages? Page down? Okay. There we go. Oh, page up. Is this going to fit on the page? Maybe not. So this is the result. Let's see, do I have it here? Okay. These are the results of a fascinating cross-cultural survey that was carried out in 2005 in 32 European countries along with the United States and Japan. Respondents were read the statement, "Human beings, as we know them, developed from earlier species of animals." And they were asked whether they considered it to be true, false, or were not sure. Okay, so you see in Iceland, so blue is true, red is false, and white is not sure. So in Iceland, approximately 90% of the population thinks evolution is true, approximately 5% says it's false, and 5% is not sure. Now we go down. In the United Kingdom, it's about 80% think that evolution is true. In Italy, it's about 70%. In Estonia, it's about 60%. Now we go down and down and down. Can you see now? In 33rd place, we have the United States, with about 40% saying evolution is true, 40% saying that evolution is false, and 20% saying they're not sure. And who is in 34th place? So in Turkey, about 1/4 say that evolution is true, 1/2 say that evolution is false, and 1/4 are not sure. Now, I stress, this question concerns only the fact of evolution, okay? Not its mechanisms, just the fact, okay? Of the 40% who say that evolution is true in the United States, approximately 2/3 of those believe in what we would call theistic evolution. Evolution happened and was guided by God, and about 1/3 believe in naturalistic evolution. evolution occurred and God played no role in it. But you see, in Turkey, only 1/4 of people believe in the fact of evolution, at least as it relates to the human species. Now, of course, not all religious people reject evolution. Fundamentalist Christians do reject evolution, as do many Muslims and many Orthodox Jews. But Catholics and liberal Protestants have come over time, and perhaps very grudgingly, but they have come to accept evolution, as have some Muslims and most Jews. Therefore, from a purely tactical point of view, non-fundamentalist religious people are the allies of scientists in their struggle to defend the honest teaching of science. And so, if I were tactically minded, I would stress, as most scientists do, that science and religion need not come into conflict. I might even go on to argue, following Stephen Jay Gould, that science and religion should be understood as what he calls non-overlapping magisteria, science dealing with questions of fact, and religion dealing with questions of ethics and meaning. But I cannot, in good conscience, proceed in this way, for the simple reason that I don't think the arguments stand up to careful logical examination. Why do I say that? Well, for the details, I have to refer you to a 75-page chapter in my book. But let me at least now try to sketch the main reasons why I think that science and religion are fundamentally incompatible ways of looking at the world. Now, first of all, when analyzing religion, a few distinctions are again in order. For starters, religious doctrines typically have two components: a factual part, consisting of a set of claims about the universe and its history, and an ethical part, consisting of a set of prescriptions about how to live. In addition, all religions make, at least implicitly, epistemological claims concerning the methods by which humans can obtain reasonably reliable knowledge of factual or ethical matters. These three aspects of religion of each religion obviously need to be evaluated separately. Furthermore, when discussing any set of ideas, it's important to distinguish between the intrinsic merit of those ideas, the objective role they play in the world, and the subjective reasons for which various people defend or attack them. Unfortunately, much discussion of religion fails to make these elementary distinctions. For instance, confusing the intrinsic merit of an idea with the good or bad effects that it may have in the world. Now here, I want to address only the most fundamental issue, namely the intrinsic merit of the various religions' factual doctrines. And within that, I want to focus on the epistemological question, or to put it in less fancy language, the relationship between belief and evidence. After all, those who believe in their religion's factual doctrines presumably do so for what they consider to be good reasons. So it's sensible to ask, what are these alleged good reasons? Each religion makes scores of purportedly factual assertions about everything from the creation of the universe to the afterlife. But on what grounds can believers presume to know that these assertions are true? The reasons they give are various, and I analyze some of them in the chapter in my book that I devote to religion. But the main justification for most people's religious beliefs is a simple one. We believe what we believe because our Holy Scriptures say so. But how then do we know that our Holy Scriptures are factually accurate? Because the Scriptures themselves say so. Theologians specialize in weaving elaborate webs of verbiage to avoid saying anything quite so bluntly, but this gem of circular reasoning really is the epistemological bottom line on which all faith is grounded. In the words of the Catholic Pope John Paul II, I quote, By the authority of his absolute transcendence, God who makes himself known is also the source of credibility of what he reveals. It goes without saying that this begs the question of whether the texts at issue really were authored or inspired by God, and on what grounds one knows this. Faith is not in fact a rejection of reason, but simply a lazy acceptance of bad reasons. Faith is the pseudo-justification that some people trot out when they want to make claims without the necessary evidence. But of course, we never apply these lax standards of evidence to the claims made in the other fellows' Holy Scriptures. When it comes to religions other than our own, religious people are as rational as everyone else. Only our own religion, whatever it may be, seems to merit some special dispensation from the general standards of evidence. And here, it seems to me, is the crux of the conflict between religion and science. The problem is not the religious rejection of specific scientific theories, whether it's heliocentrism in the 17th century or evolutionary biology today. Over time, most religions do find some way to make peace with well-established science. Rather, the scientific worldview and the religious worldview come into conflict over a far more fundamental question, namely, what constitutes evidence? Science relies on publicly reproducible sense experience, that is, experiments and observations, combined with rational reflection on those empirical observations. Religious people acknowledge the validity of that method, but then claim to be in the possession of additional methods for obtaining reliable knowledge of factual matters, methods that go beyond the mere assessment of empirical evidence, such as intuition, revelation, or the reliance on sacred texts. But the trouble is, what good reason do we have to believe that such methods work, in the sense of steering us systematically, even if not invariably, towards true beliefs rather than towards false ones? At least in the domains where we have been able to test those methods, astronomy, geology, and history, for instance, they have not proven terribly reliable. Why should we expect them to work better when we apply them to problems that are even more difficult, such as the fundamental nature of the universe? Last but not least, these non-empirical methods suffer from an insuperable logical problem. What should we do when different people's intuitions or revelations conflict? How can we know which of the many purportedly sacred texts, whose assertions frequently contradict one another, are in fact sacred? Now, in all these examples, I have been at pains to distinguish clearly between factual matters and ethical or aesthetic matters because the epistemological issues they raise are so different. And I've restricted my discussion almost entirely to factual matters simply because of the limitations of my own competence. But if I am preoccupied by the relation between belief and evidence, it's not solely for intellectual reasons. Rather, my concern that public debate be grounded in the best available evidence is, above all else, ethical. Now, to illustrate the connection I have in mind between epistemology and ethics, let me start with a fanciful example. Suppose that the leader of a militarily powerful country believes, sincerely but erroneously, on the basis of flawed intelligence, that a smaller country possesses threatening weapons of mass destruction. And suppose further that he launches a preemptive war on that basis, killing tens of thousands of innocent civilians as collateral damage. Aren't he and his supporters ethically culpable for their epistemic sloppiness? Now, I stress that this example is, as I said, fanciful. The overwhelming preponderance of available evidence suggests that the Bush and Blair administrations first decided to overthrow Saddam Hussein and then sought a publicly presentable pretext using dubious or even forged intelligence to justify that pretext and to mislead Congress, Parliament, and the public into supporting that war. Which brings me to the last, and in my opinion, most dangerous set of adversaries of the evidence-based worldview in the contemporary world, namely propagandists, public relations flacks and spin doctors, along with the politicians and corporations who employ them. In short, all those whose goal is not to analyze honestly the evidence for and against a particular policy, but simply to manipulate the public into reaching a predetermined conclusion by whatever technique will work, however dishonest or fraudulent. So the issue here is no longer mere muddled thinking or sloppy reasoning, it is fraud. The Oxford English Dictionary defines fraud as the using of false representations to obtain an unjust advantage or to injure the rights or interests of another. In the Anglo-American common law, a false representation can take many forms, including a false statement of fact known to be false at the time it was made, a statement of fact with no reasonable basis to make that statement, a promise of future performance made with an intent at the time the promise was made not to perform as promised, an expression of opinion that is false made by one claiming or implying to have special knowledge of the subject matter of the opinion, where special knowledge means knowledge or information superior to that possessed by the other party and to which the other party did not have equal access. Does anything here sound familiar? These are the standards that we would use if George Bush and Tony Blair had sold us a used car. In fact, they sold us a war that has thus far cost the lives of 179 British soldiers, 4,478 American soldiers, and somewhere between 100,000 and 1 million Iraqis. Do you notice the scandal here? I can tell you down to the exact number how many British and American soldiers were killed, and I could tell you their names. I can't tell you the number of dead Iraqis even within a factor of 3. I have looked at the evidence. Epidemiologists have tried to figure it out. It's not clear. But it's a minimum of 100,000 dead Iraqis are known by name, and some plausible studies suggest as many as 1 million. That is a human toll of somewhere between 30 and 300 September 11th. This is also a war that has thus far cost the American taxpayers a staggering $800 billion, with ultimate estimates ranging from $1 to $3 trillion. Also a war that has strengthened both Al-Qaeda and Iran. In short, a war that may well turn out to be the greatest foreign policy blunder of American history. Of course, the British have a longer history, and hence a longer history of blunders to compete with. Now, all this is very likely old hat to most of the people in this room. We know perfectly well that our politicians, or at least some of them, lie to us. We take it for granted. We're inured to it. And that may be precisely the problem. Perhaps we have become so inured to political lies, so hard-headedly cynical, that we've lost our ability to become appropriately outraged. We've lost our ability to call a spade, a lie, a fraud. Instead, we call it spin. Now, we've now traveled a long way from science, if you understand science narrowly as physics, chemistry, biology, and the like. But the whole point that I'm trying to make is that any such narrow definition of science is misguided. We live in a single real world. The administrative divisions used for convenience in our universities do not, in fact, correspond to any natural philosophical boundaries. It makes no sense to use one set of standards of evidence in physics, chemistry, and biology, and then suddenly relax your standards when it comes to medicine, religion, or politics. Lest this sound to you like a scientist's imperialism, I want to stress that it is exactly the contrary. As the philosopher Susan Hack lucidly observes, our standards of what constitutes good, honest, thorough inquiry and what constitutes good, strong, supportive evidence are not internal to science. In judging where science has succeeded and where it has failed, in what areas and at what times it has done better and in what worse, we are appealing to the standards by which we judge the solidity of empirical beliefs or the rigor and thoroughness of empirical inquiry generally. The bottom line is that science is not merely a bag of clever tricks that turn out to be useful in investigating some arcane questions about the inanimate and biological worlds. Rather, the natural sciences are nothing more or less than one particular application, albeit an unusually successful one, of a more general rationalist worldview centered on the modest insistence that empirical claims must be substantiated by empirical evidence. Conversely, the philosophical lessons learned from 4 centuries of work in the natural sciences can be of real value, if properly understood, in other domains of human life. Now, of course, I am not suggesting that historians or policymakers should use exactly the same methods as physicists. That would be absurd. But neither do biologists use precisely the same methods as physicists. Nor, for that matter, do biochemists use the same methods as ecologists, or solid-state physicists as elementary particle physicists. The detailed methods of inquiry must, of course, be adapted to the subject matter at hand. What remains unchanged in all areas of life, however, is the underlying philosophy, namely, to constrain our theories as strongly as possible by empirical evidence, and to modify or reject those theories that fail to conform to the evidence. That is what I mean by the scientific worldview. It is because of this general philosophical lesson, far more than any specific discoveries, that the natural sciences have had such a profound effect on human culture since the time of Galileo and Francis Bacon. The affirmative side of science, consisting of its well-verified claims about the physical and biological world, may be what first springs to mind when people think about science. But it is the critical and skeptical side of science that is the most profound and the most intellectually subversive. The scientific worldview inevitably comes into conflict with all non-scientific modes of thought that make purportedly factual claims about the world. And how could it be otherwise? After all, scientists are constantly subjecting their colleagues' theories to severe conceptual and empirical scrutiny. On what grounds could one reject phlogistic chemistry, or the inheritance of acquired characteristics, or Newton's particle theory of light, not to mention thousands of other plausible but wrong scientific theories, and yet accept astrology, homeopathy, or the virgin birth? The critical thrust of science even extends beyond the factual realm to ethics and politics. Now, of course, as a logical matter, one cannot derive an ought from an is. But historically, starting in the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe, and then spreading gradually to more or less the entire world, Scientific skepticism has played the role of an intellectual acid, slowly dissolving the irrational beliefs that legitimated the established social order and its supposed authorities, be they the priesthood, the monarchy, the aristocracy, or allegedly superior races and social classes. 400 years later, it seems sadly evident, as I've tried to demonstrate today, that this revolutionary transition from a dogmatic to an evidence-based worldview is very far from being complete. So I'd like to thank you all for your patience in sitting through this long diatribe and to open the floor to all the comments and criticisms that you'd care to throw at me. And I should stress, feel free to speak Turkish. I believe that there is some, my Turkish is not very good, as you may have guessed. I believe that there is some mechanism for translating for me. What is the situation? Is somebody going to give a microphone to a person, or do you just speak loudly? How does this work? Oh, and you're going to give me earphones for translation. Thank you. So.
First of all, I would like to thank you for coming and say hi. My name is Doğan, and I would like to ask you a question about evolution. Maybe it's going to be a little bit out of topic, but as I know, conditions must be right for life to exist, and evolution occurs over these conditions. Therefore, when we make an experiment over...
I'm sorry, can you speak a little bit more slowly? I'm also having trouble understanding.
Okay. As I know, conditions must be right for life to exist. And evolutions occurs over these conditions. And therefore, when we make an experiment over an event and let this event be over dogs, and let us put wild dogs, wild dog colony into a new habitat. And in this manipulated habitat, they can only find their 80% of foods in trees and 20% of their foods in the ground. And then we start to decrease that 20% into 0% uniformly over the experiment time. And this time can be 1,000,000 years too. After when we reach the 0% food on the ground and 100% of the food on trees, dogs, these wild dogs will not be able to find any food by their existing abilities, right? And as a result, will they got new abilities as an evolution, like flying or climbing the trees like cats, or are they going to be eliminated from these habitats? Oh, it's a wrong question.
Well, is my microphone working? Yes. So first of all, I should stress I'm a physicist, not a biologist. So my knowledge of, I am not an expert. So I think a detailed question about evolutionary biology like that you should pose to a specialist in the field, not to me. But what I do want to stress is that was a question about the detailed mechanisms of evolution, right? And of course, evolutionary theory, the details of those mechanisms are debated by people, by specialists in evolutionary biology. So I don't know, since I'm not a specialist, I can't say whether your question has an obvious correct answer or whether it's a question that is now being debated by specialists. Okay? But what I tried to stress is that the fact of evolution, the evidence that biological species, including the human species, have evolved, is so overwhelming that no educated person in the year 2011, or for that matter, in the year 1900, could possibly deny it. Nevertheless, 40% of people in the United States and 50% of people in Turkey do deny it. Secondly, the mechanism, the general mechanisms of how natural selection works have been verified not only by observations from paleontology, but also by laboratory experiments on species that evolve reasonably fast, bacteria, fruit flies, and so on. So there's no doubt among educated people that natural selection is at least one of the major mechanisms driving evolution. There is, of course, debate among specialists about the relative importance of other mechanisms, for example, random drift.
For example, can we draw this situation from that? For example, we have 8 billion people on the world, and you know, after one point, this world will not be capable to carry those people. So, in that point, will that natural selection starts to make selection over people? So, educated people will stay on life, and uneducated people, sorry, you are going to dead, something like that, or are we going to invade another planet?
Well, I mean, I think even evolutionary biologists don't want to use it as a tool for prediction. For example, the dinosaurs were an extremely successful species. They were around for well over 100 million years.
But we are more experienced species than
right.
them,
but
actually.
The point I want to make is, imagine that human evolutionary biologists had been around 66 million years ago. And here were the dinosaurs who had already been in existence and dominant for 100 million years. Could anyone have predicted that an asteroid was going to strike the Yucatan Peninsula, which was going to eventually, within another million years or so, cause the extinction of the dinosaurs? I should say, of course, even now we're not sure whether that was the only thing that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs or whether there were perhaps other causes. But the point I'm trying to make is using evolutionary theory to make predictions may work well in the laboratory where you're making predictions about bacteria evolving over the course of a few weeks. It may not work well in predicting the future history of life on Earth.
Thank you.
So again, if you ask in Turkish, I will put this on for a translation.
Hi, welcome. Some research has been going on in CERN about the Higgs matter. What do you think about Higgs matter then? Do you think God will prove by science?
I'm sorry, what do I think about?
What do you think about the Higgs matter? Higgs. And
the Higgs mechanism.
Yes, Higgs mechanism.
Oh, well, again, I should say, I am not a specialist in elementary particle physics. I have studied it a little bit. I think we probably have some experts in the room who should answer that more than myself. But for those of you who are not physicists, let me just say the Higgs mechanism is one part of the so-called standard model of elementary particle physics. And the problem with the standard model is, so the standard model is the model which basically became our model of elementary particle physics around the time that I was a student in the early 1970s. And the problem with the standard model is it has been too successful. The standard model has correctly predicted every experiment that has been done in elementary particle physics. We have not yet observed any deviations from the standard model. But there are two problems. One is the standard model has more than 20 free parameters, numbers that have to be put in, and we have no idea why those numbers take the values that they do. You do 20 experiments to find those numbers, and then the standard model will predict the result of the 21st experiment and the 22nd experiment. But obviously, the standard model is incomplete. We want to know why those 20 numbers are what they are, and we don't know. And the other thing is, for various theoretical reasons that I don't want to go into now, we know that the standard model cannot be the end of the story. It has to break down at high enough energy, but we don't know how high energy, and we don't know in what way it will break down. So there are people in this room who are working on that. One of them just came here. There are experiments going on at the Large Hadron Collider at CERN right now, which either they will detect the Higgs particle and tell us what its mass is, or they won't, and if they don't, that's even more interesting. So either way, I think our friends in elementary particle physics are going to discover something interesting in the next 10 years. It will take time. I think the point here is that science is an open endeavor, right? We don't know all the details about elementary particle physics, and we know that we don't know. We don't go around pretending to know things that we don't know. We're honest about our ignorance. I think that's the difference between science on the one hand and other non-scientific endeavors like pseudoscience or religion on the other hand, which make claims that they claim to know things that they don't in fact know.
Can I ask one more thing? Can I ask one more thing?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Then what do you think of the speed of neutrinos? You know that some research has been going on about that, and the speed of the speed limit of light.
Right.
Is
So
overrated.
you're referring to reports. I guess it was about 6 weeks ago that measured neutrinos leaving CERN in
Yes,
Geneva and arriving in a detector in Italy, which apparently arrived 60 nanoseconds earlier than they should. That is, that they apparently went faster than the speed of light. Now, this came up because, as it turns out, I'm teaching a course right now in special relativity for non-scientists. This is something that we have in the United States, which I think is probably not common in other countries. Students go to the university and they take courses in a variety of fields, not only in their specialty. So all of the non-science students have to take some science. And so I'm teaching 160 students about special relativity, and when this came out in the newspaper, they asked me, and I said, look, this experiment is probably wrong. Right? There's probably a subtle mistake. In fact, I asked my colleagues who are specialists in elementary particle physics, and some of them heard the seminar given by these people, and you probably heard it too?
Yeah, I can make another comment.
Right. And so what my colleagues told me is this experimental group seems serious. They seem to have done a careful analysis of their data. There are no obvious mistakes. Probably there are non-obvious mistakes, right? I mean, this contradicts 105 years of theory and experiment. Probably this is wrong, and people have pointed to where the error might be. Apparently there is a bunch of neutrinos that are coming out. This bunch is 1 microsecond or several microseconds long. Now, a microsecond doesn't sound very long to you, but remember, these neutrinos are arriving 60 nanoseconds early. So that's very small compared to microseconds. And so there may be some problem in measuring which neutrinos are coming when. And anyway, so the details are subtle, but the philosophical point, the important philosophical point is what I told my students. This is probably wrong, but we have to wait and see. If it turns out that this is right, then I have to go for retraining before I teach this course again. Right? Yeah. That's what science is. Science is open. I ask, will the Pope change his doctrine if new evidence comes along? I doubt it. Right? I think that's the difference between science, or for that matter, will the homeopaths change their doctrine if new evidence comes along? I doubt that too. Science, if it's to be true, science has to be open to, we have to be open to changing our mind if there is good new evidence. So we will wait and see.
Yeah, I can make an extra remark about this experiment. Probably the experiment was not wrong, but they have underestimated their errors. This is the problem. Yeah. I mean, they are measuring time of flight for 736 kilometers. They measure the time that neutrinos started and arrived. It is easier to determine with a good precision, it is easier to determine the arrival time, but the departure time is very difficult because you cannot observe directly the neutrino. So even single neutrino, you can observe when it arrived because there are so many neutrinos and one of them interacts with the matter. I mean, otherwise a neutrino can pass through matter, which is, I don't know, 100,000 of light year of matter can pass without interaction. But if you use millions of billions neutrino, one of them will interact. But this is true for arrival time. When departure time, they are using indirect methods to determine when the neutrino started its travel. And here their error estimation is 1 nanosecond. And this is too low. And I watched this seminar also, which happened at CERN. And everybody objected at that point. They underestimated their error. So if they change their error estimation, then speed of it will be between errors. I mean, the speed of light plus minus inside errors. So this is their main problem: underestimation of errors.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this talk. My question will be more like a philosophical one, but it's like, how would you conduct a life mission by using only science? Like, how would you conduct a life mission for a person? I mean, a reason, like, because it's what the religion gives to people. It's a reason to live. Like, I mean, the world is crowded. Like, I mean, it's not the way. It's not what the religious people say. It's how they say it. They say it's strong, even though it's like. Even though it's like not true and full of things that's not real, but the way they say it, it's like effective because they say it like very strict and like sure. I mean, people buy this stuff because of this, not because of like what they are saying is true or not. They don't think about it. Like, so yeah. Thank you.
Right. What I would say is, first of all, the goal of science is limited. The goal of science is to find true answers to factual questions. That is not the only thing that one wants to do in one's life, as I stressed. There are ethical questions. You don't go to the physics department to discuss ethical questions. You go to the philosophy department. There are questions, as you say, about the meaning of life. That science, it's not part of science's role to answer those questions, although science may give you some relevant evidence. Obviously, whatever you're doing in life, you need to have accurate knowledge of factual matters in order to carry out your life. But it is not the purpose of science to give a meaning to life. That is something which we have to do by other means. Now, religion is one of the means that many people use to give a meaning to life. All I can say is, as I said, I tried to distinguish between the factual part of religious doctrine and the ethical part, or the part having to do with meaning. And I want to make that distinction because when it comes to the factual part, I will reject almost all of the factual part of most religions, because most of the factual claims of most religions contradict well-established science. On the other hand, when it comes to the ethical parts, much, not all, but much of the ethical parts of all the major religions, I agree with, right? I mean, I don't agree with all the details. I mean, fundamentalist Christians and I will disagree about specific ethical things, but people of all religions and no religion agree, for the most part, about basic ethical things. And so we have to distinguish these two aspects. And the question is, what can, under what circumstances can religion contribute anything to ethics or to meaning? You say religion gives people this meaning, but if the religion's factual doctrines are false, what is gained from this? Right? I mean, we have to, why build your life on self-deception? We have to try to establish factual matters as best we can, using evidence, and then give our life meaning by other methods.
Biraz önce nötrinoların hızıyla ilgili konu sorulduğunda ışık hızının muhakkak bir sabit olduğunu ve deneyin yanlış olmuş olabileceğini düşündünüz. Oysa ışık hızıyla ilgili hesaplama da yanlış olabilir eğer bilim dininin mensubu değilseniz. Çünkü siz deneyin yanlışlığını söyleyerek bir anlamda adeta bilim dininin mensubuymuş gibi bir tavır gösterdiniz. Öte yandan bir başka yaklaşımınız anlatımda yine bir bilim dininin mensubuymuş gibi bir Darwinci evrimin gerçek olduğunu veya öyle olması gerektiğine inanmışçasına adeta bir bilim dininin müridi gibi konuştunuz. Ama siz her söylediğiniz konuyu bilim dini mensupları somut olarak ispatlayabilecek argümanlara sahip misiniz, yoksa üst üste koyduğunuz tuğlalar en alttaki tuğlanın bir gün yanlış çıktığında yıkılacak bir tapınak mı?
I'm sorry, I don't think the high-tech translation worked. No. Did the translator leave? Maybe that's... I think maybe the technology worked and the translator left. No?
Sorry. Maybe it's about your...
I hear... Yes. I have to ask you to repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. It will be very difficult, but I will try it. Diyorum ki nötrinonun hızıyla ilgili konuyu anlatırken ışık hızının sabit olması gerektiği ve nötrino hızının ışık hızıyla aynı olması gerektiği gibi bir varsayımdan hareket ettiniz. Adeta tavrınız bir bilim dininin müridi gibiydi. Keza Darwinci devrimi veya evrimi anlatırken ki tavrınız yine aynı şekilde bir bilim dininin müridi gibiydi. Ben diyorum ki bu bilim diye bugüne kadar sizin tanımadığınız manadaki bilim üst üste yığılmış bir tuğlalar yığını olabilirse, sizin alttaki tuğla ezilse ve duvar yıkılsa, bütün bu tasarım, kağıttan kule gibi tasarım yıkılsa, o zaman neyi anlatmayı düşünüyorsunuz? İkinci bir şey daha. Mesela yine sizin matematiksel modellemelerinizde yakalanmış bazı altın oranlar var yaratıklarla ilgili. Bu altın oranlar eğer akıllı bir tasarımın ürünüyse sizin model halen çalışmaya devam edecek mi? Ne dersiniz? Teşekkür ederim.
Okay, I'm not sure that I have understood the second question. But let me try to answer the first question. The first question said that I was adhering to a scientific religion. So I want to stress that, in my opinion, science is not a religion. As I tried to explain in my talk, the fundamental differences between the scientific worldview and the worldview of any religion. The fundamental difference is precisely that science is open to revision based on new evidence or cogent new arguments. So, for example, if it turns out that these systematic errors can be reduced, and it becomes, if it turns out that this experiment gives convincing evidence that the neutrinos are going faster than the speed of light, then we will have to revise our current theories of physics. We will have to revise special relativity, because yesterday in New York, I was teaching my students, I was explaining to them the logical deductions from special relativity, which imply that neutrinos either go at the speed of light or slower than the speed of light. They cannot, we currently believe, go faster than the speed of light. But as I say, I taught my students this because it is a logical consequence of a theory which has been confirmed by many experiments. But it is possible that this theory is approximately right, but not exactly right, and maybe has to be radically revised. That has happened to us before. Newtonian mechanics was verified to very high precision by experiments and observations both on the Earth and in the solar system. But it turned out that Newtonian mechanics is not exactly right and had to be replaced by special and general relativity. So I am open to the possibility that perhaps special relativity, which I was teaching yesterday in New York, is wrong and has to be revised. My guess, as Karim is, my guess is probably special relativity is right, and probably this experiment has systematic errors which are bigger than the experimenters realized. But we will see. So it's that openness to changing our theories if the experimental evidence demands it. It's that openness which characterizes science and which distinguishes it from religion. Now, just to go to the last part of your comment, you're right that science is built as a tower. It starts at the most fundamental level from direct observation, and then we build on that with a whole series of theories. So, for example, when, let's say, you measure a current, an electrical current with a meter, okay? You're not really measuring the electrical current. You are looking at a needle on a screen or on a number on a digital readout. That needle or that digital readout is related to the electrical current via some intermediate theories, which you are assuming to be true. On the other hand, it's not arbitrary. Those intermediate theories have themselves been tested by many experiments. So yes, it's true. Science is a building with bricks at the bottom and building up. And it is true that if you pull out, some parts of this building may be wrong. And if you pull out some part of the building, then other parts will collapse or have to be revised. But which parts will collapse? That's why I thought that Susan Hack's example of a crossword puzzle is a good one, right? You're working on a crossword puzzle and you fill in some words which you think are right, but you're not sure. And then you find a new word, and then maybe you realize you made some mistakes and you start erasing. And so in most cases, you only have to erase a little bit. But in some cases, the erasures may propagate, and you have to erase more. And I think that's what science is like. And as you know, you should do a crossword puzzle in pencil, not in pen. And I think that's what the scientific attitude is, work in pencil.
Ben o tuğlalarla ilgili bir örnek vermiştim. Altın orandan bahsetmiştim. Sorry. O tuğlalarla ilgili bir örnek vermiştim ve altın orandan bahsetmiştim. Yani bazı modellerde, yaratıklarda altın oranların olduğuna dair bir sürü makale var. Eğer altın oran var ise ve sizin söylediğiniz gibi üst üste konan tuğlalarla bu altın oran ispatlanıyor ise bu akıllı bir tasarımın varlığına işaret eder gibi geliyor bana. Siz buna katılır mısınız? Peki bir başka konu daha. Bu bu altın oran yine sizin düşündüğünüz gibi evrim mekanizmasının aklından mı kaynaklanıyor?
No, I'm sorry. The second question I just didn't understand. But the golden ratio I understand in mathematics is 1 plus the square root of 5 over 2. Is that what we're talking about? Well, I mean, the golden ratio is a concept in mathematics. Oh, you're saying that certain things in biology show Fibonacci number ratios. Aha. Okay, I don't know enough of, I remember as a child seeing that in a book of mathematics that I was given as a present when I was 5. But I don't know enough about biology to know whether these observations have been explained. In some cases, there may be mechanisms.
May I ask a question then? You kind of separated science and ethics. You said science is not behind ethical answers, but something else. But I think science is, you cannot so easily separate science from ethics. Imagine atomic bomb was once an experiment in a laboratory, but then something else happened. So I was wondering your perspective, your opinion on science integrated into politics. And I mean, you gave obviously some examples from the war in Iraq and etc. But I mean, what is the general position of science attached to real politics, let's say?
Right. Well, of course, science raises ethical questions. Each technology gives you the ability to do something. Whether it is a good or bad idea to do that is an ethical question, not a scientific question. So of course, you're absolutely right. Science raises ethical questions, and I think in the future it's going to raise more and more ethical questions, especially the progress of biology is going to raise more and more ethical questions. And I don't claim to any particular expertise about these questions, so I don't say how to answer them. How to address these ethical questions will certainly involve scientific knowledge. If you want to resolve an ethical question about phenomenon X, it's important to have a good factual knowledge of phenomenon X. That is necessary, but not sufficient. So one thing that certainly we should do, since there is going to be more discussion of ethical questions relating to biology and medicine, it's important for the general public to have at least an accurate scientific, a roughly accurate scientific understanding of what the scientific facts are. For example, with genetically modified food, right? You could have an accurate understanding of genetic modification and still be for it or against it. But let's at least have the debate based on accurate scientific knowledge rather than on misinformation. That I think is the main point. Beyond that, there are many more questions, but I don't feel that I have any special competence to discuss those ethical questions. But what I do want to stress is, I think it was clear from my talk that I was opposed to the Iraq War, right? I think that was obvious. But I would respect somebody who supported the war based on at least honest arguments based on real facts, right? There were some honest arguments to be made. I don't think that they carried the day, but some people made honest arguments in favor of that war. Unfortunately, most of the people who argued for that war made dishonest arguments. And so that's what I wanted to stress. What I want to see is honest debate about the issues that we have to decide based on an accurate knowledge of the relevant facts, whether those facts are scientific facts or historical facts or economic facts. Then we have to discuss, questions of ethics and morality come in.
Well, the previous question was about the effects of science on politics. I want to revert this question and ask the effect of politics on science. So can a scientist isolate the way he makes science from his political views?
Well, of course, scientists are human beings. And most scientists, like most human beings, are interested in politics. I mean, I think I'm interested in politics more than the average scientist. I try to keep my science separate from my politics in the sense that I don't make decisions about scientific theories based on my political beliefs, right? Of course, in my field, there's no danger, right? I don't think that there is likely to be a leftist or rightist or centrist theory of phase transitions. So in a certain sense, I'm lucky. It's easy for me to keep my politics and my ethics out of my science. It's harder for an economist, right? Economics has two aspects. It has a scientific aspect, which is to determine how particular economic systems work. If in a capitalist economic system you change the interest rate by 0.5%, what will that do to the output of the country, et cetera? Those are factual questions, difficult factual questions, because unfortunately, economics is more difficult than physics. But by the way, do you know this story? Do you know Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winner in economics? In one of his books, he wrote that he has a friend, an economist friend in India, who said that, of course, in the Hindu system, you will be reincarnated. And his economist friend said, if you live a good and virtuous life, you will be reincarnated as a physicist. And if you lead a sinful and evil life, you will be reincarnated as an economist. And the point is that economics is more difficult than physics. For example, people change their behavior based on, people change their economic behavior based on the theories that economists make. Electrons do not change their behavior based on the theories that physicists make. So for that reason alone, economics is much more difficult than physics. But in any case, economics has one aspect which is potentially scientific, a difficult science, but potentially scientific, namely to try to determine the facts about how particular economic systems work. Of course, economics has another aspect, which is to suggest policies. But then you have to use not just facts, but ethics, right? I mean, there may be a policy which increases income for the rich and decreases income for the poor. Is that good or bad? Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it increases income a little bit for the poor and decreases income a lot for the middle class and upper middle class. Is that good or bad? Well, it's not obvious, right? So those ethical questions can be debated even if the purely factual questions are clear. And in economics, unfortunately, even the purely factual questions are difficult. But at least I think an economist should try to keep these two aspects separate, should try to be a scientist when he's talking about factual matters, and then discuss policy proposals separately. Because that is not just involving his scientific status as an economist, it's involving his personal ethics, which might be different from other people's ethics. And so in general, I should say, in policy questions relating to science, I think scientists should always be careful to distinguish these two aspects. When speaking as scientists, they should limit themselves to presenting the evidence about the facts and to explaining how strong or weak is that evidence. Then, when it comes to policy questions, they have to take off their scientific hats and become merely a citizen with the same rights as everyone else. A scientist has no more expertise than any other citizen when it comes to evaluating what outcomes are good and what outcomes are bad. Any other?
Thank you again.